With a significant amount of people speculating and covering tons of Eldenring DLC content leading up to its release, it got me thinking about something I haven't heard nearly as much about. What is FromSoft's next game actually going to be like? Or more importantly, what will it achieve? After gathering some bits of information that I found interesting and reflecting on what they created in past games, my belief is that the new IP FromSoft will make is headed in a very interesting direction, maybe in some ways people didn't expect. The biggest similarity in Souls games spanning Demon Souls all the way up to the Elden Ring is formula. The formula never ceases to exist in some sort of fashion, with the only actual departure being Sekiro. You could argue the fact it has boss fights, health bars on the screen, and is third person, which is enough to be a ripoff of Dark Souls, but let's not forget that FromSoft didn't invent third person games with boss fights. These elements came into play over history of video games overall, and it's impossible to say that Miyazaki invented those things himself. What they did is they perfected the balance of old school feel of having your hard-earned progress on the line if you didn't play well enough to succeed, with the addition of the progress being the currency of Souls. Souls allowing you to effectively make the game easier by leveling, buying items, and sometimes also increasing damage. Affecting difficulty once again is so essential that it reminds me of a very watered-down version of having limited lives to play a game in the first place. This feature intertwined with the elements aforementioned of boss fights with the big soundtracks, the health bar, and the title on the screen, as well as secret shortcuts and friends we met along the way, give the atmosphere itself such a distinct feeling that the term Souls-like is actually tangible at this point. Difficulty is predominantly a noticeable design element in the forefront of their creations, but not at the cost of being unfair, just simply unforgiving. There's several smaller things that each game did for the lineup of From Software games overall, including the black sheep Sekiro, and we're going to break down them starting with Demon Souls. The biggest feature that leaps off the page right away with Demon Souls, even looking back from where we are now, is the character and the world tendency feature. In simple terms, if you haven't played the game, the system functions on a varying scale of black and white tendency, which is actually kind of like a karma system, not based on interactions with the NPCs, but based on dying in human form. When you become human and die in the Archstones, or essentially the non-hub areas outside of the Nexus, each Archstone gets darker until eventually pure black. The opposite happens when you defeat a boss without having a death in human form, which can be achieved by dying in human form in the Nexus, and then going back outside the Nexus into an Archstone and dying in soul form, which would not shift the tendency. If you beat enough bosses this way, tendency shifts to pure white. Having pure white or pure black will unlock events in the game that wouldn't be possible to access normally. Since Demon Souls, we haven't seen a system like this return at all, and though it's probably unlikely it will come back exactly how it was for a future FromSoft title, it is by far the most unique thing in the game that sets it apart from the rest and the typical formula. I actually really enjoyed this feature, and it added to the mystery that Souls games tend to create in the player's mind itself. Dark Souls 1 did not have a feature like Soul Tendency that stuck out at all, but it did offer an ingenious interconnected world within that brooding atmosphere that is still to this day incredibly hard to capture or even describe. The map itself is like a vertical bias pretzel with quite a bit of dimension within itself. I'll pop up some cool examples on screen if you haven't actually seen it before. There's some amazing 3D views of it available, and even 2D artwork that perfectly paints the picture. No pun intended. One other thing about Dark Souls 1 is Ash Lake. The Covenant that's hidden there is the coolest in the game in my opinion, and although it's just simply hidden behind an invisible wall, the descent through the Great Hollow, which is already extremely deep in the depths of Blighttown, make it feel like something we're not supposed to find. The fact that it also has a soundtrack is really cool, unlike other areas of the game that end up being dead silent. Ambient music didn't return to the Souls-type game until Elden Ring. Dark Souls 2, though fatally flawed in the likes of living up to its previous title's atmosphere, was able to implement so many small changes with the mechanics and features of design, and some of them actually came back in the future. Though adaptability is quite controversial, the fact you have to invest into a stat that makes the character's invincibility on rolling a larger window of frames kind of does make sense. Hear me out. In real life, though it would be demonstrated visually different, you'd have to level up some sort of stat or skill within yourself to avoid objects and attacks more effectively, which would kind of culminate in agility. This is poorly represented with the limitation that the game represents the animation the same regardless of the level of adaptability. But still, it's kind of interesting despite the hate. I think from a perspective of it being a video game and mechanics being earned that are so crucial and balance dependent is a huge point of contention still. The fact that you can two-hand either weapon or even a shield in Dark Souls 2 was completely new at the time, which allowed for some interesting utilization of the character on the fly. Pair this with power stancing weapons that combine the moveset, and on top of that, being actually able to cancel the startup of animations. Well, now we're cooking. You can also roll away from starting to open a door, but that's kind of important, because one of the biggest downsides is that it takes longer than the average human lifespan to get through the door completely. Though this one is my most played Souls game and I love it dearly, Dark Souls 3 didn't really do a whole lot specifically that stands out as much as the previous mentioned titles, but more so merged together a bit of everything that people liked in this weird but cool stepchild that does the dishes unprompted, keeps up their grades in school, and usually never argues with mom or dad. You could call Dark Souls 3 a fan service to the things that we loved, but we could never have it all at once previously. The fan service aspect is what FromSoft use as their strength in strategy, but Miyazaki did say openly that he doesn't like making sequels as much as new games. I feel as though he tried to make this one to kind of give the trilogy a very good ending rather than ending on the note of what B-Team achieved with Dark Souls 2. You can see a lot of the effort put back in from the first game, and you can see some of the things that they adapted from the second as well. I'm sure you noticed at this point, but something with the order of the games seems off right here. I bet someone's already foaming at the mouth, typing up a storm in the comments about how Dark Souls 3 came out after Bloodborne. Unfortunately, you fell right into my trap card. For the sake of building on the excitement, and because I love Bloodborne way more than Dark Souls 3, well, just a few tads, we'll keep moving through this. Bloodborne was the game that changed the most about the formula overall, but is still so close and familiar to that action RPG vibe. This is the first time we saw RPG elements decrease, but not in a bad way, in a refined way. That refinement added quality to the title that didn't seem like excess for the sake of having all the items and the weapons you can imagine, but a smaller selection for the sake of believability. It worked wonders in my opinion. The Hunter's trick weapons are immediately an aspect that took some adjustment for players, and I don't have to theorize to know for a fact that this was the first game most of us played that took longer to adjust to, because all of the newness wrapped up in a similar package was a lot to handle. The transform attacks were worth using, though it wasn't necessary. They could give you a significant advantage in gameplay. Pair this with the limb-breaking mechanic on many of the bosses and you have this new puzzle to unfold. The strategy was changing in a very cool direction. The bosses had a lot more health, raw damage, and unfortunately you did not have many tools that you could use at your disposal to make them a lot easier other than trying to leverage the mechanics that were newer. Although even sometimes those mechanics were not enough to make it significantly easier. The quick step in place of the dodge roll really sped up the pace of the game, and the fact that you could still do the dodge roll while locked off had its own advantages too. One wasn't simply better than the other, and it felt like everything Bloodborne did within its mechanics and weapon designs was important. The parry system using guns and bullets to activate the animations, though not too difficult, allowed you to remotely parry at a distance, and then dash or run into critical attacks, which was never possible before. You could of course still be point blank, but this was amazing because it even went as far as allowing you to parry other hunters when they tried to heal. It's a shame that PvP wasn't more organized because it could have been epic with these nuances. The biggest departure for the atmosphere was easily the story and setting. Much more modern, but with the same fantasy twist that Miyazaki loves in his games. It felt like when first starting it, opposed to the ending of the game, you walked through two different worlds in one. Without knowing the secrets of the Great Ones and the arcane powers, I genuinely couldn't stop wondering about what was in store once hitting Forbidden Woods and realizing the game departed outside the cityscape and Beast Slayer narrative. Sekiro came in hot after Dark Souls 3, and though it was widely received, seemingly from a more general audience as well, the game was polarizing to fans of the classic Souls game formula. Comments like,
"I don't like Sekiro because you can't make a character or change the weapons,"
were not uncommon. The idea of RPG elements were nowhere to be seen, which made this the first FromSoft title that was a pure action game with all the values learned since Demon's Souls as well. It was amazing to me because I'm a huge mechanics guy. I love Sekiro for everything that it's not. There's not a single thing I would change about the game. Replayability does suffer in this case, and you also will probably never catch me having it near the playtime I sunk into Bloodborne or the Souls titles. I still think it's an extremely important game for the direction that FromSoft is going, even in 2024 and beyond. The fact Sekiro achieved better visuals, more direct storytelling, a main character with identity, and used the post-Edo Japan era as the backdrop for cultural flair made this an achievement that was so impressive, especially considering that the game itself was Game of the Year. I could go on about all the things that make Sekiro different, but it's pretty obvious after sinking in even 5 to 10 minutes. One thing to note before moving on is that Wolf's method of travel by use of the grapple hook embedded in his prosthetic arm paved the way for more expansion and unique design in their future title, Eldenring. They even brought back jumping on an actual button. And my guess is because of Sekiro, the idea of horseback travel on Torrent and jumping with attacking was inspired by it to some degree. Elden Ring, the game that wasn't a fan service as much as Dark Souls 3, nor a departure as big as Sekiro, but something in the middle all at the same time. The first thing I loved about Elden Ring was the collaboration with George R.R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones. His contribution to the storyline was noticeable and something new for Miyazaki's games. There never was a mention of some third party coming in and writing the story before, and I'm sure most of us can agree that their minds merging together on this project did not disappoint. A huge point of contention, but also celebration with Elden Ring, was the scale of the game. Now there was the ability with the technology to add in environments like never before with vast open plains, while secluding the density of the previous games within those regions to cater to new and old. The downside was that a lot of us felt like some of the content wasn't as necessary or interesting. There was a lot of major bosses and legacy dungeons which were cool, but there was also a lot of other areas that felt a little bit more uninspired and possibly just a way to fill up the map, as you would expect with something that was only in production for so many years. The most important point about this, though, is that there's a lot of room to improve here, because they did achieve the scale which they had never before, and in the future, I believe that the quality and density will just keep expanding within those larger regions to account for all of the things that they missed out on opportunities with in Elden Ring. For what it is, Elden Ring is such a huge achievement, and it's how I imagine Miyazaki would have expanded Dark Souls even sooner if he could have. Though the technology is there now, and they have achieved a massive world, the fine-tuning aspects are what I feel is yet to come, but certainly on the horizon for the next IP. Miyazaki himself stated recently that the size of the upcoming DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, will be 20% of the entire game. He compared it to the total size of Limgrave, which is a significant portion of the map. When you think of Limgrave, you think of a lot of empty land between Stormvale Castle, the southern peninsula, the forts, and so on. What I really believe will be the case is a much denser design within a perimeter that spans that large. This is also a concept I've been thinking will be present in the next original game they create as well. Now, I'm not claiming the game will be as big as Elden Ring's map as a whole, but as FromSoft has demonstrated previously, they will learn from what they did previously and capitalize where they can. A topic I haven't mentioned as much in this video is visual fidelity. The Souls games have never been cutting edge for their time in the sense of visuals. The style they incorporate is amazing for what they are, and mostly, if not all of them, have a solidified atmosphere that's memorable in my books. This is a balance that even with extremely realistic looking games can be super hard to achieve. You need to have characters that mean something to the story and don't just feel like placeholders. You need conflict and enemies that have depth. You need music that outlines all of this very nicely, and most importantly, the creative vision overall to exceed the requirement of pumping out a game because we need money. If From Software keeps making these games, it's inevitable that there will be a general increase in the graphics proportionate to the tech available at the time. Even with styled visuals that don't create real-life mimicry, you are bound to see impressive stuff. The question is, will the next title be the biggest jump so far in terms of those visuals? I think it will be a general upgrade this time, especially with the fact that it's a new IP. The physics engine that the games have used is also something that, while it's still awesome, could always be further built on or changed. Conceptually, the way that the animations work overall have much more room for depth that has only been realized in small amounts thus far. Imagine a Dark Souls formula type game built in the latest Unreal Engine or other competitive engine that plays well and isn't buggy. Lies of P is one example of a Souls-style game that actually looked very impressive to me, and though the gameplay was excellent and I loved the story, its visuals were able to do something that I had not felt from Dark Souls that even set it apart. Lies of P still isn't the best looking game, but it's polished and tastefully executed in my books. In terms of innovation, we have seen new introductions across the previous games, with the biggest curveball still being Sekiro as a departure, and Bloodborne a shakeup within its own formula. Those aspects will most certainly be at play in the new IP, but in some ways I'm sure we have not seen utilized yet. One thing I haven't gotten into yet in any video is FromSoft's involvement with Tencent, a behemoth of the gaming industry. Here's some direct information from PC Gamer's article. From Software parent company Katakawa Corporation has announced that it's issuing new From Software shares to Six Joy Hong Kong and Sony Interactive Entertainment. Six Joy is a subsidiary brand of Tencent, whom you'll know from having a slice of seemingly every pie known to humankind, and Sony Interactive Entertainment is, well, Sony. Once the shares are issued, Sixjoy will own 16.25% of FromSoft and Sony 14.09%. Katakawa Corporation will remain the controller and majority owner of the company by a wide margin. It owns a full 69.66% of the remaining shares. A slight increase in share amount for two companies, even if they are Tencent and Sony, that confers no extra power or rights may not seem enormously interesting, but it's not necessarily the shares that are important here. Katakawa and FromSoft are acquiring 36,399,550,000 yen, or $262,268,221 off the back of this deal, which they intend to put to good use. Katakawa says that the reason for the share sale is to use the funds for the expansion of the scope of FromSoft's own publishing in the significantly growing global market. With the power of self-publishing and still being able to remain in creative control, a lot of prospects can open up for the company itself. As long as Miyazaki remains in charge of the vision of these projects, I only see more of what's been discussed here coming to life, and I can safely say, in a world of overstimulation, too many choices to choose from, and the desensitization of how good we actually have it as enjoyers of media and games, they will make bangers, and this will continue for the foreseeable future. The timeless quality of many of these titles they already have created is being put to the test right now, and almost every single one of them holds up for me. As picky as I can be about games overall, this is still the case. It will be exciting to look back in another 15 years and see how this next lineup of games will stack up against their originals. Please leave a comment on what you want to see in the next game that they make, and also what topic you want to see me cover in the next video. Any cool ideas are always considered and will be most likely turned into a video. If scripted videos and edited gameplay is not for you, I do have an unedited channel that has the long play of a lot of the runs that you might see on this channel, as well as some stuff that doesn't make it to it that will be on the screen and in the pinned comment below, as well as my music channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.